Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, for our purposes, Wednesday, June 14th, 2017. As you know, not on the air with a live podcast today. Taking the kids to the dentist. So exciting. But there was lots left off at the end of yesterday's show, Tuesday, June 13th, that I really wanted to get to, and I thought it would be a great idea to carry that momentum forward into a pre-recorded podcast for your enjoyment this Wednesday morning. We are sad not to be on the air live this Wednesday morning because it means not being able to have our usual live interaction with both Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter. But Joan, as it happens, was tied up in meetings anyway, and Greg just will enjoy his breakfast that much more, I guess. But I know they're both itching to get back on the air. Maybe we can get a make-good session at some point later on in the week with Joan if she can free herself up from the other work. And, of course, Greg will be back with us on Thursday. So, what was it that was so pressing that we couldn't get to on Tuesday that we hope you'll enjoy on Wednesday? Hopefully events will not have outpaced us. You never know with this Trump administration what will get past us. When we left off on Tuesday's show, we had just had a rather exciting and extended discussion forced by Trump's own sociopathy, to use that word. I wanted to get a free usage of that word in there. I have a coupon for it, and I recommend you get one as well. That his sociopathy had forced us to consider the real possibility, if it exists, and we were pondering all of what it means to even make that pose that question. What about the possibility of Donald Trump just outright firing the special counsel, Robert Mueller, and doing it? Well, we outlined different methodologies in which he could do it within the dictates of law or outside of the dictates of law. And for our practical purposes, we couldn't spend that much time examining how he could do it outside of the dictates of law, because if you do everything outside the dictates of law, what's the point? Whatever he wants to do, he can do. Can't a dictator just do anything he wants? Well, he can do whatever he can get away with anyway. But we also examined some of the how and more of the why of Russian hacking pre-election and what they were doing to coordinate / collude / just generally help out the Trump campaign during the early part of the general election campaign, and then how they sort of switched gears, thinking Trump would lose, but looking to continue to undermine the possibility of undermine a potential Clinton administration, and doing so by undermining American voters' confidence in the integrity of our election system, which is an enormous attack on American democracy. Yes, we pondered, of course, what to do about certain things or those kinds of attacks, and did they warrant the usual, or I guess what people think of as being the usual response, which is outright war, and can you afford to do that? And maybe that explains some of the dodging that was going on, or the refusal to confront the situation. Who knows what drives all these things? They're complicated and have a lot of moving parts. Similarly, we considered, for instance, in the what-ifs about the firing of Mueller, we noted that Adam Schiff had been tweeting that, well, in that case, the Congress would absolutely come back and reauthorize the independent counsel statute. We're not certain that they would. Likewise, we wouldn't be certain that they would go down the impeachment road either. But I guess you start to wonder, okay, at what point do Democrats say there's this red line in the sand? There's not much they can do with their red line until they have a majority, or at least a functioning majority, in Congress. But for instance, I guess I'm asking, does it even make any sense to have the intermediary step be outlined there. Like Schiff thought he was talking tough. Like, if you fire Mueller, the Congress has no choice but to reauthorize the Independent Counsel Act. And does it even really make any sense at that point? I mean, why not just say, if you fire Mueller, we'll pursue impeachment, period. And I mean, maybe that's too broad a brush. Maybe they want to wait and see. Do they think that Trump's excuse for firing Mueller would pass muster with enough of the American electorate that there would be consensus against impeachment? I guess you got to hold out that possibility if you're just considering everything. Though it seems difficult to imagine. Who knows what they could come up with, or what they might find or make up, or have Russians plant, for that matter. Lots of fundamental questions wrapped up in this. But if you're wondering what is the proper threat for Democrats to make, that's an open question too. Because at the same time as he's tweeting this, and other people are saying, well, we could go right to impeachment. We have reports that once again, the Democratic leadership, cautious as it is trying to tamp down on talk of impeachment, which is easy enough to believe because it's familiar territory. We were there in 2005, 2006 when some of us were advocating the impeachment of George W. Bush. Slightly different situation, to be sure, but it was warranted nonetheless. But for political reasons, the Democratic Party leadership was much more interested in heading into the 2006 election, midterm elections, without having to campaign under the banner of or answer for any calls for impeachment, because they thought that would make the electorate nervous and that they would be perhaps willing to put Democrats in charge of the House of Representatives, but not for the purposes of impeaching George W. Bush, but for the purpose of conducting proper oversight. And if the facts led you to conclude that impeachment was absolutely necessary, we'll discuss that later. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but please don't campaign on the premise of impeachment. I don't know that the country is in the same mood, but that's their default play. And I'm not, I wasn't in the room, and I'm sure by Wednesday, real Wednesday, that now for the rest of you who are listening, but tomorrow for me who's recording this thing, we might have a clearer picture of why, if that's the case, the leadership was tamping down on talk of impeachment, and we could examine whether or not it was a different rationale. I don't know. But I would think a different one might be necessary at this point, unless we just don't believe. Maybe we suffer from a little bit of podcast bubble. Here among us and our friends, we all know that everybody would be for getting rid of Trump, but out there in real America, could it possibly be different? Well, yeah, it could. And we have to acknowledge that and think about that and game out exactly what we think that might mean. There was more to the reports about Russian hacking, etc., that I wanted to put on the record that I didn't get a chance to do yesterday. And it seems to me, I put this story aside, and I'm pretty sure that I had put a similar story aside before, and I am not certain that I got to it. But we might as well put that on the record and then head off into the other things that I semi-promised anyway on Tuesday that we would get to on today's broadcast. Let's see. I'm certain that there is something else down here in pocket from earlier, but I'm not certain that I have any real chance of finding it in timely fashion, although it looks like it's, there's definitely some stuff down here that bears some relevance. Let's start then, though, at least by putting this on the record. This is a piece from the New York Daily News, not often cited on the show, But let's open it up, and just as a continuation of yesterday's story, and I think it would have been the Daily Beast piece that we were looking at yesterday that invoked the name of Robert Mercer, and it always bears following up whenever Mercer's name comes up. This piece from the Daily News is dated June 10th, so it's a little earlier on in all of this. Adam Edelman. And again, I'm afraid that this came up, got put in pocket, and didn't get entered in the record. I really think you need to have this piece of the puzzle to sew things together. The billionaire GOP patron behind Trump's social media bot army. We've talked about Robert Mercer as the patron, of course, of Cambridge Analytica and the big data analysis arm of the Trump campaign, and we've seen Jared Kushner try and claim credit for that, and we've seen other people try and claim credit for it. We'll leave that fight for another day. Let them settle that one and stab one another in the back about this. What about the bot armies? So we talked about their existence. We talked about, for some, a little bit about what they did and how they were used. We didn't talk a whole lot about where they came from or how they got paid for. That's what's being alleged here. A GOP donor who once had ties to IBM, it's true, but seems like a weird lead, is the man behind the millions of Twitter bots President Trump counts on as followers who could be employed to target voters with misleading or fake news on social media. We also talked about the fact that he had gotten a tremendous amount of fake or bot users all of a sudden following him on Twitter, and we found out why that would matter. Not so much because it appears to inflate his importance and his reach and his leadership abilities, but that these bots can be used as infection vectors, dissemination vectors anyway, but we'll say infection vectors for spreading fake news farther and wider, and we all know what kind of effect that can have. In order for it to work, this article continues, the scheme relies on the quiet guidance of Robert Mercer, a reclusive Republican megadonor and staunch Trump supporter. Sources told the Daily News. Mercer, who during the campaign, with help from his daughter Rebecca, played a below-the-radar but integral role in raising money for Trump, and connected him with critical figures like Stephen Bannon. He's a former computer scientist, don't lose sight of that, who decades ago helped build the technology at IBM that the computer giant would later use to create its Watson supercomputer. He also helped companies like Apple form the basis for its Siri platform. Trump, meanwhile, has accrued among his 30 million Twitter followers, 15 million of which are actually bots that experts have told Daily News could be weaponized to spread fake and misleading news stories that favor the White House or distract from the scandals it now faces. But with the subtle introduction of advanced technology by individuals familiar with artificial intelligence, their effectiveness as it pertains to targeting users and interacting with them could escalate rapidly. Fooling humans into doing things in the electronic realm turned out to be really easy, said Simon Crosby, the chief technology officer at a firm called Bromium, pointing to well-documented campaigns that are thought to have influenced the 2016 presidential race and the Brexit referendum in the United Kingdom. But with a few extra steps that seem available in the right circles, it could get even easier, he added. Some of the technology that's part of Watson, explained Crosby, and two other computer scientists who preferred to keep their identities private. Some of the technology that's part of Watson can quickly build, test, and deploy bots or virtual agents across mobile devices or messaging platforms to create natural conversations between apps and users. So two things going on here. One, of course, the use of artificial intelligence to create what appears to be natural conversation between a machine that doesn't actually have to either be paid or doesn't have to rest or take time off of Twitter, which makes them much more effective than human beings. But in addition, there doesn't even need to be any human work involved in the creation of the bots anymore. Even that can be automated. That technology is even built to understand a user's personality, tone, and emotion and interact naturally with people. You have arbitrary and ridiculous information spread very quickly, and now to targeted users more susceptible any targeted users more susceptible to believing it and spreading it, and we know that it influences people. We saw it in the election with Brexit, he said. Ultimately, the problem is that anybody can talk to anybody, especially if anybody is a bot on Twitter or Facebook who knows a lot about you. All of the scientists were keen to point out that such efforts would not be employed by Watson, an entity actually owned and patented by IBM. Don't blame IBM for it, is what they're saying. Okay. Rather, they indicated it would appear to make sense for a man familiar with its inner workings to draw on his own expertise to help hone a bot operation for a political candidate. While pretty much any one computer scientist with the right motives could help someone in the Trump camp do such a thing, most artificial intelligence technology at this moment is open source and freely available if one knows where to look. The proximity of Mercer to the Trump campaign in particular raises questions. Long before making his fortune at Renaissance Technologies, his current hedge fund, Mercer, age 70, worked at IBM, where his name appeared on several patents and on many publications and studies about Brown clustering, which the computer giant used to create its Watson artificial intelligence systems. Mercer, of course, did not respond to questions about his involvement with the Trump campaign. Mercer, who helped get Breitbart News off the ground years ago with millions of dollars in donations, also invested at least $5 million in a firm called, Cambridge Analytica, a small tech operation that mines online data to reach and influence potential voters and uses secret psychological methods to pinpoint which messages are the most persuasive to individual online viewers. The New Yorker magazine reported that earlier this year, and we may even have read that. That kind of technology has already been employed in candidates whom Mercer supported, including Trump, and could easily be used in future efforts to target voters on social media, Crosby said. We're in deep trouble in the sense that it's extraordinarily easy to automate a generation of arbitrarily absurd and ridiculous stuff. All true and all pretty much on the nose. It's getting easier and easier, in other words, for fake news to take root with particularly susceptible people, and not just susceptible people, but susceptible people who are also very likely to share it with other highly susceptible people. You see how this is done, and it's no longer just taking a stab in the dark. And we don't need any longer to have Macedonian teenagers or American teenagers, for that matter, staying up nights trying to craft ridiculous fake news stories to try and plant wrong-headed notions in the minds of the American public. They can go to sleep and let the robots do it instead. How scary is that? Okay. Well, I just thought I would put that on the record and make that connection with Mercer. Mercer just happens to have the most extraordinarily dangerous combination of artificial intelligence expertise, a huge pile of money that he can use politically, and, of course, to fund some more of these AI operations, and extreme reactionary right-wing politics. I guess that raises the possibility that it would be awesome if there was an ultra-liberal who had the same combination of skills and money, but I don't know whether there really is. And mind you, that Mercer used that combination of artificial intelligence skills to create the pile of money. I mean, the hedge fund thing. He's not a financial guy primarily. He's an artificial intelligence guy. It's just that he was able to use his AI expertise to identify investment opportunities. This is a great life plan, by the way. If you happen to have these skills, automate the making of money, the identification of huge payoffs in investments, to accrue a giant pile of money, use the giant pile of money to refine that methodology until your huge pile of money is an even huger pile of money, and then, I guess, set the artificial intelligence machines to work to convince people that your politics, your preferred politics, are the way to go, and back that up with that enormous pile of money on top of everything else. It's kind of disgusting, and you could forgive the founding fathers for not having foreseen this happening. I mean, the giant piles of money even were probably too difficult to imagine that big a pile of money at that point. But even if you got that, the idea of machines that never sleep, that are programmed to figure out who can be fooled how easily and by what, and actually make up the stuff that they can use to fool them as well, and then disseminate it itself 24/7, 365, and that extra quarter day as well, because it's a machine, you see, and they're being very precise. I don't know if anybody could have contemplated that one. That seems like a little bit outside of the realm of possibility for our founders to have figured out. But like a number of things that we've contemplated over the years on the show, everything that we've ever had to go back and wonder whether the founders had thought of, this outpaces them all. But hey, it's a fun way to start a show, is what I'm saying. Okay, there were other things that we mentioned in the closing minutes of the show yesterday, which definitely needed to be brought up and considered as well, some of which were addressed by the after show, and I hope you got a chance to listen to the after show yesterday. Doubtless they will be picking up the slack for us after today's show as well. But I had mentioned that I had mentioned it during the Tuesday show, that during the Monday show, Bill in Portland, Maine, had asked about the status of the health care bill and where we were in its consideration and what was likely to happen and when. And the answer is nobody knows, because the bill is secret. Now, this Wednesday morning, I assume the bill is still secret and that it'll remain secret. But here's what I'm learning from various sources, some of which I have clickable sources for you on and some of which I do not. What I'm finding out is, as you would expect under normal circumstances, the Republicans are, in fact, writing this bill down. They're definitely doing that. They're just not sharing it with us. But as you know, because it's going to be considered under reconciliation rules, and because we think that in the first instance, Republicans are interested at least in making an attempt at sticking with those reconciliation rules and passing the bill under them so that there's less to assail them for when it's done. The substance of the bill is plenty. But if they can avoid procedural criticism, they might seek to do so. Although, really, honestly, this bill is so bad substantively, they might as well just go to town on the procedure as well, and to the extent that we're criticizing them over their procedure, that would be considered a victory. That's how bad the substance of the bill is. But never mind that. They probably are unlikely to consider that. So what are they doing? They've got a text, and I think they're done with it, and they've given it over to the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, even though, one, like we've noted, they could just ignore everything that they say, and two, they've been doing the groundwork for discrediting the CBO. I don't know how well it's taken hold, but senior Republicans in the congressional ranks have been outspoken in saying this. Mick Mulvaney, the OMB director, has likewise leveled the accusation that the Congressional Budget Office, despite the fact that it is built from the ground up to be a nonpartisan operation, they have nonetheless dismissed it as exactly the opposite and inherently partisan, and therefore incapable of fairly scoring the American Health Care Act for any purposes, including the purposes of determining whether or not its text passes muster with reconciliation rules. And remember, again, I guess it's worth reiterating one more time that the reason they're using reconciliation for this bill is that it is not subject to filibuster. Statutorily, the time for debate of the bill is limited to 20 hours, so you do not need to invoke cloture, and so therefore the bill gets passed or can be passed with a bare majority in the vote. Just as any other bill can be passed with a bare majority, it's just that you need 60 votes to invoke cloture. So, again, that makes it difficult to start contemplating, like, how crazy will Republicans go in just throwing the rule book out and ignoring everything. The fact that they've bothered to try to bring this under reconciliation, and the fact that they've submitted the text for CBO scoring, I guess you have to look at it and say that argues in favor of their being interested in complying with procedural rules to the extent possible, to the maximum extent possible. Otherwise, they would have just said, I guess, well, no, you know what? We're not even going to bother with reconciliation. It's too difficult. It's a big hassle. For one thing, we have to show the bill to the CBO, and we don't even believe in the CBO. So we're just going to invoke the nuclear option on the legislative filibuster once and for all and pass this thing with a bare majority that way. That way we don't have to show our bill to the CBO. We don't have to worry about the score leaking. We don't have to worry about the score eventually getting out and affecting the passage of the bill as we want it. But they haven't been willing to do that. So that's, you can and should take that to mean something. It could all be a ruse. This place has gone crazy, Washington, D.C., and we always have to contemplate the worst possible outcomes for all these things. But so far, not much but supposition in the way of arguing and in the way of evidence that Republicans are just going to throw the rule book out right away. Will they get to it? I don't know. Anyone's guess. Maybe. And it's hard to be optimistic. Let's say that. Okay. So they have submitted the bill to the CBO for scoring. They are going to at least make a show of saying, okay, well, this section or that section, can't make it. We can try and have a vote to waive the rules or waive points of order against their consideration. But, generally speaking, it looks like they're going to give the text to the CBO. The CBO needs about 2 weeks to score it. And that leaves them with they hope, the week prior to the July 4th recess for consideration of the bill. And with a bill that's statutorily time limited to 20 hours for debate, it's entirely possible to get the thing done in a week. So, it would be very likely that, if they're willing to ignore all obstacles, but still live within the bounds of reconciliation rules and the current rules of the Senate, they could still get this thing done between June 26th and the departure for the July 4th recess at the end of that week. So that's what they appear to be doing. And they've sent this thing off for CBO scoring, and the critical debate and voting week is coming, and you should absolutely not be waiting to register your objections, both by calling any Democratic senators who might represent you and insisting, one, of course, that they oppose the bill, and two, reiterating that you will be looking for them to do anything that they can, not just not vote for the bill, and not just to jump out of the way of the bill. There's a lot of discussion going on. And I guess that's why I found it relevant to go back to the bot stuff this morning. I don't know that they have bots doing this necessarily, but it is difficult to tell when someone you've never heard of, but who nonetheless, for instance, I wonder if they're able to manipulate things to the extent that has a bot ever gotten verified? I don't know what the real verification procedure is on Twitter. I've heard things about it, but I don't actually know what it is because I'm not verified. Greg Dworkin's verified. Greg, you could tell us a little bit about that process, if there even was one, or whether a blue check mark just showed up on you one day. But I mean, does it preclude the possibility of verifying a bot? That's a good question. I bring that up because I saw, by the time I got ready to sit down and do today's pre-taped podcast, in between yesterday's show and sitting down to this, in just a minute or so on Twitter, I ran into somebody with a verified check mark and everything, who appeared to be making the argument that I had seen elsewhere, and I can't tell you whether the people who made it were verified or not, that they were hearing rumors that Democrats in the Senate were looking to jump out of the way of this thing. Instead of fighting it tooth and nail and coming to the floor with 1,000 amendments and using the vote-a-rama procedure. Did I ever actually explain that to you? I'm pretty sure we must have gone over it at some point. I'm losing my mind. I'm losing track of what we've talked about, what we haven't. It's so convoluted. But, budget and reconciliation bills, because of the time limitation, is where you'll have these vote-a-rama situations come up. There's unlimited amendments, and although you don't have time to consider the amendments or debate them, you can still bring them, and you can't be prohibited from doing so. And so there are very often these marathon vote sessions at the end of considerations of budgets. I don't remember ever seeing it with a reconciliation bill, but the conditions of a reconciliation bill are the same for all intents and purposes as they are on a budget bill, and we very frequently see vote-a-ramas on budget bills. Anyway, I think it's possible, and rather than try and fight it out and either stretch out consideration of the bill into the July 4th recess to test the resolve of Republicans, will they stay in session and forego the recess in order to finish work on the bill, or will they say we'll come back to it later? We don't know, but it's worth a try. There's no real particular reason for getting out of the way. But some people are out there spreading the rumor, which for all I know may be true. That's the difficulty in all this, that Democrats in the Senate are thinking, listen, we really can't prevent this thing from passing. And at best, the best scenario we can hope for is we bring so many amendments that Republicans eventually, toward the end of the week of the 26th, say, I really, really want to get out of here for the July 4th recess. I just have too many important things to do. Sometimes people have trips overseas. Sometimes, under normal circumstances, people say, I've got to get back to my state and talk to my constituents. That they want to avoid at all costs, I'm sure. But under the best possible scenario, you got all these amendments pending, and they say, we're just going to stop where we are. We'll come back after the July 4th recess and deal with the rest of these amendments and pass this thing later. And if they do that, at that point when they come back from recess, open question as to whether Democrats care anymore about delaying the thing. The best they can do, of course, is to continue insisting on the consideration or voting on their amendments. And as long as they're able to keep up the amendment machine and keep voting on it, they'll never get to final passage on the bill and blah, blah, blah. But, that's like the equivalent of filibustering by amendment. You're really that's a talking filibuster. You have to stay on the floor, even though no talking is allowed. It's still as hard a job as a talking filibuster. Stay on the floor, voting 24/7. What, you're going to do that for 2 more years? Well, okay. So at some point, the practical implication of all this is that eventually they all drop from exhaustion, and then there's a final vote on the thing, and it gets passed. So the question is, do they knock themselves out? Do they work themselves to death to delay what everybody thinks is the passage of this bill on, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, 11 days? How long do you go on with this? On the other hand, there's the consideration of the longer you drag it out and the more dramatic this fight is, the more resistance there is to the passage of the bill. And maybe, all it takes is changing perhaps one senator's mind would be enough to defeat this thing the way the margins are. So do you take that opportunity or do you not? I don't know. I don't know what I could counsel people. You just have to play it by ear, I guess. So, anyway, in addition to all this nonsense, I thought I would I thought it might give some order to things if I read a Sarah Binder tweet storm, which I discovered on Tuesday morning, and which by Wednesday morning may already have been turned into a more coherent published article. But I'm not there yet. I'm on Tuesday pretending it's Wednesday, and all I have is Sarah's tweet storm. Are we ready for discussing this one? It might give some structure to the question of where is this bill And is the fact that it's being kept a secret more than just a horrible political problem, bad optics, and just bad for the country in general, doing things in secret? Or is there something illegal or against the rules about it? And the general answer is no. That's what Sarah is here to tell us. Unfortunately, no. Secrecy, she says, in deal-making is not a new mode for Congress. The trend of centralized, closed-door bargaining has been underway for some time. But, and there is a but, because this is a tweet storm, there's got to be a but that pattern has typically been used after the legislative process has ground to a halt. For example, House appropriations bills on the floor. And say, after years of kicking the can on the doc fix, remember the Medicaid, was it Medicare or Medicaid? Medicare, doc fix. Greg would be able to solve that for you right off the top of his head, and is probably doing it right now. Or other must-pass measures that run up against hard deadlines like a debt ceiling. So, some key differences between current Senate secrecy / rush on the AHCA and past episodes of closed-door bargaining that are worth thinking about. Must-pass bills have deadlines and usually tough consequences for inaction that push leaders to go secret and lawmakers begrudgingly comply. You could see how that would happen in the case of a debt ceiling, right? Look, we need to get this thing done, or there's a default. That's horrible. My preference is for public deliberation on everything, but for right now, I think we're limited in time. We have 12 hours left, let's say. And if we just do this stuff behind closed doors, although it stinks, it will save the country immeasurable heartache. If we can get this done, we just got to do it, right? Past centralized deal-making also typically includes the opposition party, and that's a big deal too, right? Usually you bring in the other side and you say, well, we're keeping things secret in terms of public revelation of exactly what we're debating behind closed doors and ratifying later in public. And that's the key part of it. All of it gets ratified in public at the end. But the negotiation, should it be secret? Should that be allowed? It kind of has to be, right? Because, I mean, we've talked about this before. What do you do if it just so happens that the two key deal makers in all this turn out to be two people who bump into one another in a hallway on their way to get a Coke from the Coke machine, and somebody says, Eureka, I've got it. What if we da-da-da-da-da? And the other guy says, that's a fantastic idea. Plus, I love the transparency of it. My people are going to love it. Your people are going to. Let's go have a press conference. America is going to come together like never before. And they may be right. And let's say they do. And you've got the most fantastic deal ever. Everybody's happy with it. And then somebody says, wait a minute. You two guys, you weren't behind closed doors necessarily, but the public wasn't present at the meeting where this idea was hatched. It's therefore invalid. Why? It was just two guys talking at a Coke machine. That's the way human relations work. Yeah, it is. And, to the extent that you're going to say, well, that whole great idea is now in the crapper. Nobody gets the benefits of this fantastic idea because of where it was hatched. That doesn't really seem to make any sense. You got to have a little give somewhere. Once you start to have give, you can add doors, right? Okay, the Coke machine was behind a door. So there you go. All right. So where were we? Past centralized deal making, though, always typically includes the opposition party. In this case, of course, the closed door negotiation is happening all inside of one party. Like, again, even if you're worried, even if the Coke machine really literally was behind closed doors, or maybe it was literally even a literal plot to hide from the public, but the two sides got together, there's at least the idea that, well, I do have a proxy in there. It might be a terrible proxy. Maybe it was a conservative Dem, but it was at least a Democrat who has some of the Democratic Party's ideals in mind or at heart when he negotiated this stuff. Maybe less than I would desire, but he'll tell somebody. He'll go back and report to the Democratic leadership, and it'll filter back to the rest of us eventually. Not the case if there's not a representative of both parties in the negotiations. Not necessarily the case if there is a representative of both parties in the negotiations, but definitely not the case if there isn't. So, she continues, typically, in addition to including the opposition party, they typically come on the heels of failed transparent efforts to legislate. We tried to do this openly, according to the normal rules, and we bumped into this obstacle we can't get around, and now we have a time limit, let's say, or some other very compelling reason to have to act quickly, and we know that privately very often leads to more quick solutions, as undesirable as it is, so let's try it just to avoid catastrophe. Here, there's been none of that either. No inclusion of the Democrats in Congress in these negotiations, and no attempt to do it openly and honestly that ran into trouble. Deals that emerged from gang-style secrecy, Gang of 14, Gang of this, Gang of 8, Gang of the other thing, all the gangs that we've had. Deals that emerged from gang secrecy, for example, she says here, the 2013 Senate immigration, Gang of, I believe that was 8, are then defended in public in committee hearings, and floor amendments, and in votes. And that, too, is missing in all of this. Let's see if somebody has made a comment at the end of this. He says, Matt Keller, just replying to Sarah Binder here, saying, you mean not while that party's president is busy creating a constitutional crisis so Americans aren't paying as close attention? True, also that problem as well. So, Sarah Binder just bringing us back to the fact that we've seen things done in secret before, but don't let the fact that other deals have been negotiated in secret fool you into thinking that there aren't nuanced differences. And you could never fool this audience into thinking there aren't nuances to be discovered and explored. Yes, things have been negotiated in secret before, but one, there are very different circumstances involved, usually means that it involves both parties, and that later on it's defended in public. That won't be the case here. Nor will it be the case that the thing is actually defended in public very much. Nor is it true that there were attempts at anywhere along the line to do this through the normal and transparent process as well. There's just never been openness about this, and there won't be. The only thing that this will bear and this will have in common with other things that were negotiated in secret is the supposed validation of a public vote to pass the thing. We still can't get past that one. That one they're not letting go of, thankfully. But that's the very last thread that keeps, that they're clinging to, that keeps this process legal and constitutional. Tough. All right. Let's see. Where are we with the rest of this? What else do we need to bring up today? There's so much more. Yes. One of the things we didn't get to on Tuesday, but should have and will, I'm sure, return to it on Thursday because it's, near and dear to Greg, is the continuing and rather amazing story that Megyn Kelly, now out of Fox News and in at MSNBC, has decided to make one of her first high-profile interviews of Alex Jones, who is nuts. And I'm sure that she thinks she's bringing America journalistic insight into the world of the crazy, but there's a certain point at which it goes beyond that and just becomes ending up being a platform. When the guy's likewise a sociopath, you're just giving a platform to him. And somebody made a very interesting observation. I wish I had put this aside, but I just saw it in passing on Twitter. Maybe I can find it. Maybe not. I don't know. The observation that print journalism interviews are very different in nature from television interviews, in that it's easier, I guess, to get away with the excuse that you're simply exposing the crazy in a print interview, because in a print interview you get the opportunity, one, to leave the interview and then to go back and to contemplate and to process the whole thing and to say, all right, that guy was crazy and I really have a responsibility to say that he's crazy. Or I guess there's the opportunity for others to say, you didn't mention that guy was crazy and you need to correct that. There's some opportunity for that, I guess, in television journalism. But what there isn't the opportunity for usually is to go back and confront. You have to use, in TV, the interview is the interview. That's the material. I guess you could frame it sometimes in the way others do. They say, they give some explanatory material surrounding the interview, and I guess there's still an opportunity for that, and I hope she'll use it. I don't know if it excuses things, but it's very difficult to do in a TV interview unless you confront the person and say, I want video of me saying, yeah, but can you respond to the allegations that you're totally nuts and that you're a conspiracy theorist and that you cause people tremendous pain, et cetera, et cetera. To not have that conversation on tape and make it a major part of the interview is a pretty big abdication of journalistic responsibility. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of enter that on the record, and Greg pointed me to a diary over at Daily Kos on this subject and his comments in that diary. This one being from Sarah Gervais, who writes, Megyn Kelly gets social media smackdown for attempting to normalize conspiracy crazy Alex Jones. So, that sums things up rather nicely, don't you think? And let's take a look at I've clicked forward in something here, but this particular diary seems to sum things up nicely. Certainly in the headline, and a crazy picture of close-up shot of Megyn Kelly here, disturbing enough. Megyn Kelly's new show debuted this past Sunday. You'll never guess what they call it. Sunday Night with Megyn Kelly. It's on NBC, kicking off the show with a Vladimir Putin interview, also questionable. But Kelly is causing quite a storm with one of her new guests for this upcoming Sunday's show. Apparently, Kelly invited none other than Alex Jones, the internet conspiratorial lunatic extraordinaire, to be interviewed on her show. And the internet, as well as other places, are up in arms over the scheduling. Jones, the owner of a crackpot conspiracy site InfoWars and the host of the Alex Jones Show, has said that the Sandy Hook massacres, in which 20 school children and 6 employees of Newtown, Connecticut Sandy Hook Elementary School, we know the story, were mowed down in a volley of bullets by mentally ill loner, whose name I'll skip. I remember that we still try and do that. And that the whole idea on InfoWars, so the whole thing was a complete hoax. You know the story. Apparently, the detached from reality thinking goes, the parents of the children were actors, according to Jones, and the deaths were all part of a grand plot by the U.S. government in which it seeks to control and enslave the world's population by staging massive national tragedies such as the World Trade Center attacks in 2001 and the marathon bombings of 2013, which was not nearly as massive, among others. All fakes, according to Jones. The social media storm was swift and decisive, calling out the former Fox News host as an abettor of a dangerous and callous man. One man wrote that he will be boycotting Kelly's interview with Alex Jones, saying, in part, I refuse to listen to anything that evil conspiracy theorist scumbag has to say. And he said it on Twitter, and the tweet is herein embedded. Still others were calling for a boycott of the entire network. Another tweeter, Shannon Watts, who you know as for her gun activism, the mother of a Sandy Hook victim, was rightly outraged at the prospect of such an interview, informing Kelly that this is the mother of a child murdered at Sandy Hook, a tragedy Alex Jones says never happened, and emphatically asked Kelly, how could you, Megyn Kelly? Similarly, Nebla Marquez Green, the mother of a little girl also killed in Newtown, sounded off on Twitter about the wrongheadedness of giving a platform to the likes of Jones. In one tweet, she said that in Megyn Kelly's America, cruelty gets you on national TV on Father's Day. And it is well worth pointing out that is Father's Day. She wanted to know what Kelly would advise her to tell her surviving little son, Isaiah, about the interview. Kelly appeared to have little to say, but offered less than compelling reasons to this mother why she would have a Sandy Hook truther on her show. The reaction to that even was not only swift but wide, with former first daughter Chelsea Clinton tweeting that nothing could justify the spreading of lies and monstrous mistruths about such a horrific act. Definitely true. There is no justification for amplifying lies or a liar, particularly about unimaginable tragedy, Chelsea tweeted. I hope no parent, no person watches this. And here's the fun part, I guess, of that whole thing. She includes a link in her tweet after saying there's no justification for amplifying lies or a liar, particularly about an unimaginable tragedy. I hope no parent, no person watches this. And the tweet is one from our own Greg Dworkin. It's his tweet she's referencing in this, in which he says, you probably saw it on Twitter yourself, it's a horrible thing for Megyn Kelly to give a platform to a Sandy Hook truther. No justification. MSNBC, reconsider what you are doing. And interesting. So that makes its way into the consciousness of Chelsea Clinton in her own tweeting. Continuing on here, let's see. How much more of the story of Alex Jones should we look at? Well, we don't discuss him in depth, so let's take a look. And besides which, it gives proper attention to a well-constructed diary from a Daily Kos community member, and we ought to be taking a look at it. Jones, dangerously reaching and influencing the hearts and minds of millions of people, and who once had Tamerlan Tsarnaev as a follower, one of the Boston Marathon bombing suspects, right, believes that a coterie of globalists, a cabal, has designs on world domination. They always believe it's world domination. But what else is worth conspiring about, I say? Jones has said in a YouTube interview that gay marriage is a ploy of the globalists to break up the family and bring ruin to that bastion of people's allegiances, leaving those allegiances wide open for the Illuminati to gobble up. Of course, naturally, it would be the Illuminati and not some other person, but okay. He says that the globalists eliminated God not because of atheism or proper governance, but so the state could become the new God and object to your complete loyalty, the object of your complete loyalty, and I guess object to your complete loyalty to any other God. Apparently, that's his take on the separation of church and state. And he has said on his radio show, Obama is a hardcore Wahhabist. He is Al-Qaeda. Well, that seems unlikely. And Megyn Kelly thinks this is a good idea, to hand over a national media platform where millions of people are watching to a man whose detached views unquestionably crush the hearts of surviving family members and have a potential to incite more violence and more tragedy. What is this woman thinking? Kelly offered, as part of her justification for interviewing such a man, something of a journalistic cop-out. Many don't know Alex Jones. Our job is to shine a light. Yeah, that's right, Megan. Shine a light on Alex Jones and bring more people with the potential for mental illness in contact with his toxic ideas, potentially creating future tragedies in American schools and other public places. But others are pointing to less than spectacular ratings for the debut of her new show. According to a Media Matters for America article, Kelly's show fared badly in the ratings wars and actually fell short in a run-up against a rerun of 60 Minutes. In other words, the Alex Jones interview was an effort to turn around the poor showing at her debut. Her goal, according to the article, was to create a viral media event in which Kelly calls out her right-wing guests' nonsense on national television, thus creating a Megyn moment. Well, judging by the controversy she has stirred up in promoting this upcoming interview, she's not getting the response she had hoped for. But Megyn Kelly, of course, is not the first to confer legitimacy on the crackpot conspiracist Jones. Kelly herself has tweeted that the President of the United States has been on and praises Alex Jones's show, also in defense of her decision to schedule the interview. Perhaps a sign of worse things to come for NBC, however, a representative of J.P. Morgan Chase openly expressed on Twitter having second thoughts about advertising with Kelly's show. That's always good leverage, right? A J.P. Morgan senior advertising executive described feeling repulsed and rhetorically suggested that she did not understand why her company would spend money on a show that features people like Jones. In the end, it appears as though we live in a time in which crazy is the new normal. Well, hopefully not, and hopefully the economic message gets through. Sometimes it's the only one that works with certain people, so we'll see whether this makes a dent in things over at NBC or in the rest of corporate America. All right, let's see. Other items that deserve mention. Yes, another story item which I think I remember they picked up on this on the last half of the after show on Tuesday, something we haven't had an opportunity to really mention here, and that is the failed experiment in trickle-down economics in Kansas. You all will have heard the story by now, but I thought I would at least put this one on the record, and perhaps one of the better ways to do it, going to the New York Times opinion pages, and I think we had, wasn't there, I feel like there's another piece that I had gotten that Greg had shared at some point, and I wonder if I can dig that one up, because I thought that there were two things that he had sent me the other day in his usual daily list, his daily raft of stories that, how come I can't pick this up now? That he sent that we didn't make, it didn't make the air that day, and I put it aside. Let me see if I can scroll back and find this thing. But two pieces that help describe exactly what just happened in Kansas, which, the boring side of it, the factual side of it. Here we are. Let's see if we can't pick this one up. Why didn't this one get saved? I wonder why not. Washington Post piece here from Wonk Blog, Anna Swanson, and Max Ehrenfriend, who say Republicans are predicting the beginning of the end of the Tea Party in Kansas. Let's let this one give us the factual background and then head over to the opinion piece from the New York Times here. A dateline here, Overland Park, Kansas. Kansas was the heart of the Tea Party revolution, a state where 6 years ago a deeply conservative group of Republicans took the state for a hard right turn, and now, after their policies failed to produce the results Republican politicians promised, the state has become host to another revolution, the resurgence of moderate Republicans. And now, as I'm reading this through, I'm trying to think about whether or not this was mentioned or at least excerpted in Monday's show during Greg's appearance. And I can actually stop and get the real answer to that by looking through our archives and then continuing with the podcast. But I'm certain we didn't read through the entire article. But maybe that's why this one didn't make it into Pocket and the other one did. Anyway, the background. Moderate Republicans joined with Democrats this week to raise state taxes, overriding Republican Governor Sam Brownback's veto and repudiating the conservative governor's platform of ongoing tax cuts. The vote was a demonstration of the moderates' newfound clout in the state Republican Party. Brownback was unable to successfully block the bill because many of the diehard tax cut proponents had either retired or been voted out of office, losing to more centrist candidates in GOP primaries. The citizens of Kansas have said, it's not working. We don't like it. And they've elected new people, said Sheila Fromm, the centrist Republican who served as lieutenant governor of Kansas and briefly as a U.S. senator. Kansas's moderate ascendance may portend problems for Republicans in Washington, where many in the party, including President Trump, are pushing to adopt federal tax policies similar to the ones Brownback has installed in Kansas. But while Brownback had hoped what he called Kansas's real live experiment in conservative economic policy would become a national model, it has instead become a cautionary example. As predicted, of course, by us liberal hippie idiots, but never mind all of that. Brownback and his promised tax cuts were expected to spur, well, he said he expected them to spur enough economic growth to keep the government well funded. You know the story, the old Laffer curve thing, right? You're going to cut the rates, but that will generate so much more economic activity that the remittances to the Treasury will actually grow. People will be taxed at a lower rate, but because they're being taxed at a lower rate and have more capital available for investment, yada, yada, creating jobs, blah, 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 they'll make so much money on the money they were able to invest because of the tax cuts that even at a lower rate, they'll be effectively sending more dollars in revenue to the Treasury. And they never do. And we've never seen that on the federal or state level. And it took 5 years of this nonsense in Kansas for the rest of the Republican Party to get the message. And even still, the Republican governor there, Brownback, is like, no, we're making more money. It's working just fine, right? I mean, maybe that was the original fake news thing here. I mean, it was a governor who was a complete nutbar saying, we're getting more money, when everybody could see numbers are numbers. You're getting less money. What's wrong with you? And we've seen it for years. And took 5 years, something like that, for the rest of the Republican Party to catch on. Amazing. Anyway, he's insisted, and I guess keeps insisting, that this will work. State lawmakers faced perennial deficits and had to implement spending reductions to close the gap. And when they did, some lawmakers found that while promising to cut spending plays well during the campaign, the subsequent loss of public services often proves far more unpopular. See also health care. Kansas seems to be ahead of the curve. Not that it's helping with health care. It's helping somewhat with taxes, but it's not everywhere. In Kansas, they get the message. The rest of the country, there's still plenty of Republicans who think this works and thinks it can work for health care. Kansas seemed to be ahead of the curve, said Representative Melissa Rooker, a Republican who represents a suburb of Kansas City. If you look at the national political scene right now, I think it seems to me we're about ready for a course correction. So I don't know. We'll see whether they're ahead of the curve. And I mean, what are you going to say? It's your own state. You're not going to say anything terrible about it. But honestly, I mean, I'm going to throw a flag on that one. Are you ahead of the curve? Like, oh, we're the ones setting the corrective course. We say no to we're going to raise taxes because we're ahead of the curve. We can see what's going to happen. No, it's because you've effed it up very, very, very badly for long enough to realize that it doesn't work, and now you're going to correct. I don't know if you're ahead of the curve. I'm ahead of the curve. Greg's ahead of the curve. Armando, you, everyone listening to the show, you were ahead of the curve. You knew what would happen with these tax cuts. That's being ahead of the curve. You crashed into the curve and then said, ow, my arm is broken. I think I will drive myself to the hospital. It's not being ahead of the curve. But fine, what are you going to do? People need their coping mechanisms. That conclusion will be tested, the conclusion that the rest of the country is ready for a course correction. That conclusion will be tested in the upcoming gubernatorial Republican primary, even just in Kansas, when representatives of the party's more moderate and more conservative wings will square off to replace Brownback when his term expires. Nobody wants to pay more taxes, but they also don't want to live in a state that is fiscally reckless, said Republican Ed O'Malley, a former state representative and now a primary candidate. I wish he had been a little bit more on the nose and said nobody wants to pay more taxes, but they also don't want to live in a state that has no services whatsoever and is a complete hellhole. But that is nicely tied up in his mind, I'm sure, in fiscally reckless. But that gives you the opportunity to say, oh, well, what's fiscally reckless is paying for education for children. You know. It needs to be a little more pointed than that. Chris Kobach, Brownback's Secretary of State, who was once thought likely to join the Trump administration, entered the contest this week and is decrying the new tax increase. It is time to drain the swamp in Topeka. Where did he get that from? He wrote on Twitter on Wednesday, borrowing a phrase from President Trump. Of course, he didn't get to join the Trump administration in any major capacity. I think he got some sort of advisory role. Maybe it had to do with the fact that Mr. Harvard genius was photographed with the material that helped sink Trump's prized travel ban, holding it out for the world to see while he was being photographed meeting with Trump during the transition at the Bedminster Golf Club, trying to get himself a job. Being a leaker, probably right off the bat, wasn't helpful in his job prospects, but we'll see whether it helps him in Kansas. This state does not need more money, and the people of Kansas do not need to keep feeding the government monster with year after year of increased taxes, year after 1 year of increased taxes after 5 years of cutting and cutting and cutting so badly that you went bankrupt. Kobach told supporters in a speech announcing his candidacy, Kansas does not have a revenue problem. Kansas has a spending problem. Kansas has a moron problem. That's the big deal. Anyway, I'll just get through the facts here. The state's deep spending cuts to schools and programs aimed at helping the poor have been especially controversial. Michael Spear, a schools superintendent and business manager in Coffeyville, a town near Kansas's border with Oklahoma, said he previously voted for Brownback, but is now troubled by the changes forced on his profession. We're trying to make all the money stretch as far as it can, Spear said. We made a conscious effort not to impact the classroom, but I can't continue to cut custodial staff. I can no longer support him, Spear said of Brownback. Luckily you don't have to. The gubernatorial primary will involve competition for voters like Judith Deedy, a registered Republican who lives in Kansas City suburbs of Mission Hills. Deedy says that she was never very interested in politics until she and her parents at their local public school started to notice a shift. The school increased its class sizes and scaled back gifted education. Teachers, worried about their wages and future, began fleeing the Kansas City, Kansas school system for jobs across the state line in Missouri. Now, she is an avid opponent of Brownback's tax cuts. Could have told you, but you didn't want to hear it. In 2016, enough people woke up and said, we have to fix this. The guys in office are refusing to fix this, and come on. The evidence is plain, she said. I don't really care if it's a Democrat or a Republican. I just want someone reasonable. And that's nice. That's a nice sentiment, and I'm glad to hear it. And really, there's nothing wrong with it. My question is, if you were always like that, and I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican, I just want someone reasonable, and my definition of reasonable is Republicans. Because they say things like, yes, if we lower the taxes, then people will send more money to our treasury. I don't care if that's a Democrat or a Republican. I just want someone reasonable. And I got news for you. That's actually unreasonable and demonstrably untrue. But you did it anyway because you're so open to either side. I love both sides, as long as they're reasonable. Here is something totally unreasonable. I love it. I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican. I'm voting for you. Whatever. Again, coping mechanisms. Meanwhile, Brownback's remaining supporters have been quick to lambaste moderate Republicans for enacting what they have termed the largest tax increase in Kansas history, which also borrows from everybody else who came before. Jeff Glendenning, the state director for Americans for Prosperity, which is not what Kansas is actually experiencing, pledged retaliation. Why not? The conservative organization, funded in part by the wealthy Koch brothers, in part, come on, will campaign against Republican lawmakers who voted to raise taxes. He said, we'll be busy with our activists holding those legislators accountable for raising those taxes, Glendenning said. This issue is not going to go away unless you drag them out of their cars and tar and feather them. What happens in Kansas breaks so significantly with Republican orthodoxy on taxes, said Stephen Moore, a former advisor to both Trump and Brownback. There's one thing that unifies the Republican Party today more than anything else. We are a tax-cutting party. We are not a tax-increasing party, Moore said. I think Republicans across the country have to be paying attention to this. The return to more centrist policies could foreshadow trouble for Trump's tax plan, which is based on the same concepts that guided Brownback's overhaul beginning in 2012. Trump has proposed reducing the number of different rates on marginal income and setting them all at lower levels, as Brownback did. Trump has also proposed slashing taxes for small businesses. Brownback exempted small business from income from taxation entirely, opening what analysts described as a loophole in which individuals represented themselves as small businesses to qualify for the tax break. Trump has not issued a detailed proposal since taking office, but in April, the White House released a one-page document on tax policy that reiterated these basic principles, these failed and now overridden principles. A plan put forward a year ago by House Speaker Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, as you know, contains similar provisions. The resemblance points to the connections between Brownback and the conservative establishment in Washington. Before becoming a congressman himself, Ryan served on Brownback's staff when the governor represented Kansas in the Senate. Trump and Brownback have relied on the same advisors, including the conservative economist Arthur Laffer, who famously laid out the principle of supply-side economics on a cocktail napkin. Laffer argued that excessive taxation could slow the economy by discouraging people from working. His signature theory was that the government, by cutting taxes, could encourage people to earn more, maintaining or increasing overall tax revenue. Yet, most economists believe that U.S. tax rates are already far too low to benefit from Laffer's curve. The tax cuts for the wealthy, frequently advocated by Republican politicians, are viewed unfavorably by many voters, polls show. The Public Religion Research Institute, a nonpartisan group that conducts public opinion surveys, found that 57% of Americans nationally, including over a third of Republicans, support increasing taxes on those earning at least $250,000 a year. By contrast, Brownback's policies reduced them drastically. Yet Dan Cox, the Institute's research director, said that Brownback's defeat did not augur more victories for Republicans pursuing more moderate economic policies. He said Republican policymakers and their advisors around the country are likely to view the example of Kansas as a failure of implementation rather than one of principle. Conservatism didn't fail. You failed conservatism. And they will argue that Kansas's experiment would have succeeded had the legislature reduced spending even more. Moreover, Cox said the business lobby remains more influential in the party than those who support centrist or populist points of view. Trump was supposed to upend that, but it looks like he's not going to, Cox said. Despite the rebuke that conservative economic policy received in the last election, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see the same thing happen on the national stage. Well, I guess we'll compare and contrast and think about that as we read Michael Tomasky's opinion piece. Finally, something isn't the matter with Kansas. Let's find out whether that's really true, and we'll compare it, or we'll evaluate it in light of what we were just reading. The most momentous political news of the past week, for my money, it wasn't James Comey's Senate testimony, riveting as it was. It was the Kansas legislature's decision to defy the governor and raise income taxes, a move that could well be the first step in a transformation of American politics, much more far-reaching than anything that could come from Russiagate. Okay. I mean, it's just that there's significant numbers of people on the ground in Kansas who say, no, not only are you not to take a national lesson from this, but it was a mistake even for Kansas. And we're going to turn that around right here and right now. Hear me out, Kansas. That's what Tomasky is saying. Under Republican Governor Sam Brownback, Kansas has come as close as we've ever gotten in the United States to conducting a perfect experiment in supply-side economics. Interesting. Just time out 1 second. Can we flip back to the end of the other article? Right? I mean, I don't know what kind of insight, if any, Tomasky has to Kansas's situation or anything, but again, and it's not unreasonable to say this. It's true that we may have just had the closest thing to a perfect experiment in supply-side economics. And he says, of course, the conservative governor working with the conservative state legislature in the home state of the conservative Koch brothers took office in 2011, vowing sharp cuts in taxes and state spending, except for education, and which he eventually did then get to, and promising that those policies would unleash boundless growth. The taxes were cut, and by a lot. The cumulative cut was forecast to be $3.9 billion by 2019. A fellow at a right-leaning Missouri think tank said in 2015 that Mr. Brownback's cuts were, quote, the biggest tax cut of any state relative to the size of its economy in recent history. Everything's historical with these guys. But to point that out, again, they've come as close as they've ever gotten to a perfect experiment in supply-side economics, right? Versus what Dan Cox says, which is that voters in Kansas are perhaps more likely to see it as a failure of implementation rather than one of principle. That once again, well, it wasn't done right. Well, it was, you see the problem here? On the one hand, like Tomasky, do we believe him that it was a perfectly designed experiment in supply side economics? Or do we believe what Dan Cox tells us, that people are in Kansas and elsewhere are likely simply to say, it really wasn't. It was botched. We need to try again and cut even deeper this time. I don't know. I don't know which one's right. My suspicion is that Cox may be right because it's so dumb and irrational, and that's where we are in America right now. All right. The cuts came, Tomasky continues, but the growth never did. As the rest of the country was growing at rates of just above 2%, which isn't great, but it was growing, Kansas grew considerably slower rates, finally hitting just 0.2% in 2016. Revenues crashed, spending was slashed, even on education. In March, the state Supreme Court ruled that the state-level school spending was unconstitutionally low. The court is ideologically mixed, but the ruling was unanimous. The experiment has been a disaster. A disaster, apparently. Mr. Brownback is widely disliked. If he has anything to be grateful for, it's the existence of Governor Chris Christie, Republican of New Jersey, who recently swiped from him the title of the nation's most unpopular governor, which Mr. Brownback has held for the better part of 3 years. Finally, even the Republican Kansas legislature faced reality. Earlier this year, it passed tax increases, which the governor vetoed, and last Tuesday, the legislators overrode the veto. Not only is it a tax increase, it's even a progressive tax increase. A married couple filing jointly and earning $30,000 will pay an additional $120, which is 0.4% of total income, while the same couple earning $100,000 will fork over $755, or 0.755%. More than half of the Republicans in both houses voted for the increases. There's the background. Now, why is this a big deal? Because Republicans are not supposed to raise taxes ever, in Washington or in the states. This goes back to President George H.W. Bush's agreeing to a bipartisan tax increase in 1990, after famously saying in his 1988 campaign, "Read my lips, no new taxes." Afterward, the conservative group Americans for Tax Reform, led by Grover Norquist, started making Republican candidates for Congress and state houses sign a no-tax pledge. Grover Norquist, by the way, we should see if we can dig this thing up. I'll at least start the search for it so I can remind myself later. Norquist was somebody picked up on a situation with his old tweets, just like we noted with respect to Newt Gingrich in what is effectively yesterday's show. Somebody dug up 2 tweets of his about the Brownback situation, in which he had originally said, this is going to be the model for everything, the way Kansas is handling things. And then Kansas crashed and burned, and he's like, Kansas is not the model. That was literally. Here's one such tweet encapsulating that. GOP tax cut guru Grover Norquist, Kansas is the model. Then Kansas fails. And the same guy, Kansas is not the model. He actually literally says Kansas is not the model a few years later. So I have very little doubt that, unfortunately, I think Tomasky's right about the facts of the situation. There was a total failure, and lots of Republicans were able to see it. But I think Cox is right that eventually, after the next campaign and all the rhetoric and all the tribalism, they're just going to come back to the conclusion that, we want more. Anyway, so that was the story, the background being the no, read my lips, no new taxes, and then Grover Norquist and his no tax pledge becoming the order of the day. Ever since, with scattered exceptions, no Republican member of the House or Senate has voted for a tax increase for 27 years. If you wonder why problems arise and Congress never does anything about them, the tax pledge is usually the answer, or at least an answer. Think we need to build bridges and roads and lay freight rail lines? Of course we do. But we can't. It would require a tax. Think rural Americans need better access to broadband? You bet they do, but doing it right would need a tax. Think we ought to be spending far, far more than we currently are on this hideous opioid crisis, with drug overdoses now being the leading cause of death for Americans under 50? We most surely ought to be, but no, gotta pass those tax cuts. The Republican no-tax position even bears a share of the blame for our current polarization. Republicans once recognized the principle that public purposes sometimes justified the raising of additional revenue. They might have balked at the specific number the Democrats proposed, but they accepted that taxes were negotiable. This made compromise possible. The agreement between President Ronald Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill in 1983 to save Social Security. It's a famous deal among insiders, anyway, who point to it often as they lament the lost art of the horse trade. It involved benefits cuts, an increase in future retirement ages, and increases in the payroll tax. Why can't they make those kinds of deals today, you ask, for any number of issues? It's not because there's something in the water. It's not because of cable news or social media or even the corrupting influence of big money in politics. It's because Republicans won't agree to a penny in tax increases of any kind. Income taxes, payroll taxes, gasoline taxes, anything. So here's hoping that Kansas represents a breakthrough moment. The effects of our failure to invest in ourselves are all around us. Change won't come fast. For one thing, very few Americans know the above because no one talks about it. Hello, Democrats. Good point. True. But we've only had this happen. But at least for now, we can say, for the first time in a long time, that something finally isn't the matter with Kansas. Okay. Well, that's well and good. But I think things are going to get wrong with Kansas and the rest of the country again pretty soon. And I don't want to be a fatalist about it. Certainly should be making a big deal out of it. He's absolutely right about that. Democrats have that responsibility. Let me also just pick up on one other thing that occurred to me in the conclusion of this piece, where he says not only that the no-tax position sucks, but that it even bears a share of the blame for our current polarization. And he's pointing out, you can't get anything done because they love their tax cuts too much and they don't want to raise any taxes, and that we don't make deals anymore because taxes are no longer considered negotiable. Flip side to that is that it is frequently mentioned and frequently supposed to be the case that Republicans will not give up on Trump no matter how bonkers he gets, and will not agree to impeach him or restrain him in any way no matter how bonkers he gets, because they think he'll be willing to sign any crazy-ass tax cut bill that they send him. Same thing. Not only will they refuse to vote for any tax increases to do the things that are necessary, they will do whatever's necessary, no matter how damaging it is to the country, in order to secure even more cuts. So we are in a bit of a pickle on that situation, aren't we? If it's true. Now, again, as we mentioned in what was effectively for you, and still not for me, I'm still not mentally over this, that I'm doing a second show. Yesterday's show, I mentioned that there's really no reason to believe, and there still isn't one, that Mike Pence wouldn't be as inclined to sign a tax cut bill of any kind as Donald Trump. I guess it's possible that maybe at the extreme margins, there's a tax cut bill that Donald Trump is too dumb to recognize isn't horrifically damaging, but that even Mike Pence might have some kind of twinge of doubt about, possibly. But I couldn't even make a stab at what it would be about, unless it's like cutting taxes on, I don't know, people who own skyscraper condominium complexes and also steak companies. But who would, I don't know. There's really nothing I can think of that Pence wouldn't sign just as rapidly. So I don't know. But I guess that they probably think that they lose political capital for aggressiveness in their tax cutting if there's reason to believe that there's such a thing as an imperfect Republican president. I don't know. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's all it takes. Anyway, I think that there's a lot to be said for the ability of Republicans to overcome feelings of guilt and responsibility for these cuts and simply insist that they were implemented wrong. And we should be aware of that and on the lookout and watch out for it. Okay. Let's see. Moving along to other subjects. I guess since that was briefly mentioned and we've made some discussion or at the top of the show about the healthcare situation, we might as well take a quick look at this other New York Times piece, making something that we have noted in the past and is generally, I think, acknowledged by our listenership to be true, but always nice to see summarized in coherent fashion in the New York Times. The flexibility that the Affordable Care Act lent to the workforce is threatened by the GOP plan, not just the plan to, of course, repeal Affordable Care Act, but does the American Health Care Act affirmatively make things worse? That's an open question. Reed Abelson had written this piece, and I think this was another one that Greg provided to us, and we didn't get to that one day that he had suggested it, so why not enter it onto the record now? In recent years, millions of middle and working class Americans have moved from job to job, some staying with one company for shorter stints or shifting careers midstream. The Affordable Care Act has enabled many of those workers to get transitional coverage that provides a bridge to the next phase of their lives, a stopgap to get health insurance if they leave a job, are laid off, start a business, yes, or retire early. If the Republican replacement plan approved by the House becomes law, and there's no sign that there's much in the way of changes on the Senate side, changing jobs or careers could become much more difficult. Mr. Jobs, president, apparently not noticing this. Across the nation, Americans in their 50s and 60s, still too young to qualify for Medicare, could be hit hard by soaring insurance costs, especially people now eligible for generous subsidies through the existing federal health care law. This news scares Fern Warnott, 59. She has gotten insurance on the federal marketplace a couple of times in the last few years. When she and her husband moved from New York to Boca Raton, Florida, she bought a new policy for a few months to tide her over until she got coverage from a new job. A year later, she needed to buy insurance again when she found herself unemployed. The policy was expensive, around $800 a month. It wasn't easy, but it was available. Now she worries what would happen under the Republican plan if she left her job at a home health company that provides insurance. And how ironic would that be? I need something to be there, she said. I'm going to be 60 years old. All my conditions pre-exist. You should have plenty of time to bring them into existence, right? Since the Affordable Care Act was enacted, companies have become less worried about people who want to leave but feel locked into their jobs because of health insurance, said Julie Stone, who works with corporations at Willis Towers Watson, a benefits consultant. The law removed one of the barriers to leaving your job. Fewer employers now offer health insurance for their retirees, she said. The other alternative is COBRA, the federal law that requires companies to allow workers to remain on their employer's plan if they pay the full monthly premiums, which are often extremely expensive and out of reach for many people. The coverage generally lasts no more than a year and a half. COBRA was a Band-Aid on a broken market, Ms. Stone said. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimated in an analysis last month that states covering 1/6 of the population would take waivers that allowed insurers to charge people with pre-existing conditions more. It predicted that such consumers would be unable to purchase comprehensive coverage with premiums close to those under current law and might not be able to purchase coverage at all. So far, not surprising, but a good summary of things. The Budget Office did note that the House bill would potentially lead to lower prices, especially for younger and healthier people. In most markets, the low premiums would attract a sufficient number of relatively healthy people to stabilize the market. But the Budget Office also warned that markets in states that allowed insurers to charge higher premiums for people with pre-existing conditions, whether high blood pressure or one-time visit to a specialist or cancer, could become unstable. Some places already experiencing a dearth of insurers. More companies could exist as they struggled to make money in highly uncertain conditions. We're obviously seeing that beginning, as we saw in the news the other day. Millions of people could also wind up with little choice but to buy cheap plans that provide minimal coverage in states that opted out of requiring insurers to cover maternity care, mental health and addiction treatment, or rehabilitation services, among other services required under the Affordable Care Act. Consumers who could not afford high premiums could wind up with enormous out-of-pocket medical expenses. The individual market has always been characterized by a heavy churn, and insurers struggle to meet the needs of these short-timers, particularly the young and healthy, for whom coverage can be expensive. It's a huge challenge, even independent of the ACA, said John Graves, a health policy expert at Vanderbilt University. Insurers say they've had a hard time accurately estimating the medical costs of the changing pool of customers who need relatively short-term coverage and pricing their plans high enough to cover those costs. Aetna, one of the large national insurers that had decided to leave the market, said about half of its customers were new and blamed high churn as one reason the company lost money. Older people with potentially the most expensive conditions account for almost 30% of those who enrolled for insurance on the exchanges this year. David Clark wanted to retire from his job at Sam's Club at age 62, 3 years before he'd qualify for Medicare, and his wife Phyllis, who now live in the Delray Beach, Florida area, were not in good health. He has a heart ailment. She has diabetes. Before passage of the Affordable Care Act, he said he would have had to keep working. We wouldn't have been able to buy insurance at any price, he said. But he was able to retire and get coverage on one of the marketplaces. These have been really the three of the greatest years of our life, said Mr. Clark, who spends much of his time mentoring college students. Very nice. When he needed triple bypass surgery at age 64, he was covered. Many people are keenly aware that the existing marketplaces provide a safety net, even if it is far from ideal. Dr. Marie Valeroy has been able to stop working because she could afford to buy insurance on the Federal Exchange for 4 years until she was old enough to get Medicare. She has multiple sclerosis, and her symptoms were making it harder for her to see patients in Portland, Oregon. It was time for me to retire, truthfully. She said her medications cost upward of $5,000 a month. And the law made it possible for Bobby Evans, now 35, to move to New Orleans 2 years ago to be with his girlfriend, now his wife. Because he was working part-time until he could find a permanent position, he bought a policy through the state marketplace. He and his wife have talked about opening their own consulting firm. But the plan is being delayed, he said, depending on what happens with the federal law providing individual insurance. Healthcare is a big-time barrier for a lot of people's professional growth, Mr. Evans said. Very true, all known to us, and two very good examples, a couple of very good anecdotes about the kind of people who will have their lives upended or practically destroyed by this new healthcare bill. Apparently that doesn't make a dent in these guys' consideration of these things, but I guess the longer they can keep this stuff secret, the less trouble they'll have passing it. Why? Once again, why are they passing it? We've been reminded a number of times. Joan has reminded us, Greg has reminded us, you already know. This bill, it's misnamed. It's not even chiefly a health care act. Not least because it actually offers fewer people health care coverage than current law, and maybe even fewer people with health care coverage than we had pre-existing the Affordable Care Act. But it is not even primarily aimed at health care at all, whether even to destroy health care. It's primarily just a gigantic tax cut for the wealthiest people who had to kick in a little extra to make the Affordable Care Act work in the first place. It's a giant tax cut and very little else. It's just coming out of the healthcare system as the source for this money that we're going to be passing out to people who don't need it. Once again, I guess, making that point that we made at the end of the Tomasky piece, right? That just generally speaking, Republicans in the national level and in state legislatures still perfectly willing to do even the dumbest possible things in exchange for yet another tax cut. Doesn't bode well. You know what I'm saying? Okay, well, getting close to the last couple minutes of the show. Not a couple minutes. We have 20 minutes or so left in all this. And let's see. What might we use to fill that out? I was getting a little bit concerned with that Affordable Care Act thing. I felt like I wasn't learning as much as I ought to be for the time we were spending on it. But in the end, I think it gave us a pretty decent way of tying up the Kansas stories and everything else, including the process stories and what they were doing, the keeping of things secret. Yeah, that gives me another thought about, well, we'll save this one for later in the week as we get into more procedural questions about these things. Let's see. Here's something that has kind of escaped our notice up to this point, but I want to enter on the record and move on rather quickly from that one. I saw a tweet from Kyle Griffin on Twitter a couple of days ago. Just this interesting note. Dan Scavino, whose name came up in the last couple of days, Trump's social media director, apparently has been reprimanded by the U.S. Office of the Special Counsel for violating the Hatch Act. And this comes to us via his retweet of something from the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, who tweeted around a picture of the letter that, the letter from the Hatch Act unit of the Department of Justice to the chief counsel and assistant director for CREW, letting them know that they were reprimanding Scavino. The letter reads, "This letter is a response to your complaint filed with the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, alleging that White House Director of Social Media, Dan Scavino Jr., violated the Hatch Act. Specifically, you alleged that on April 1st, 2017, Mr. Scavino, while invoking his official position at the White House, posted a tweet calling for the defeat of Representative Justin Amash in a primary election. OSC has concluded that this activity violated the Hatch Act, because it totally does. Accordingly, we issued Mr. Scavino a warning letter. Nothing's going to happen. It's just out there. In addition, we note that Mr. Scavino was recently counseled about the Hatch Act by the Office of the White House Counsel. A review of Mr. Scavino's personal Twitter account since that time did not reveal any new violations. Finally, Mr. Scavino has been advised that if in the future he engages in prohibited political activity while employed in a position covered by the Hatch Act, we will consider such activity to be a willful and knowing violation of the law, which could result in further action pursuant to 5 U.S. Code Section 1215. Signed by, I'm going to have to get this machine a little closer here, Ana Galindo Maron, Chief of the Hatch Act Unit at the Department of Justice. Not super scary. I guess it means everybody gets a free shot at violating the Hatch Act and you get a warning letter. And if you do it again, well, they'll give you a serious talking to then, and maybe even possibly prosecute you. But I thought I'd put it on record in case any of the rest of you happen to be watching Dan Scavino's Twitter feed. If you happen to catch a second Hatch Act violation, well, you may have hit the jackpot on that one. They might care about it this time. What else have we got in pocket here that we can enter onto the record? I'll have to sort of review the other pieces we have here. Yes. Let's see. I'm not certain whether this is, let's take a look at it and open this up. Is this what I was thinking of? This was an interesting bit here. Yeah. Let's see. How long is this article? I guess in the wake of, why not? We'll take a look at this one. It's a little bit of, everyone could use a little bit of Trump in every podcast, right? And after all, this is written by David Farenthold, along with Robert O'Hara Jr. over at Washington Post. And we're big Farenthold fans. This comes in the wake of the president's Rose Garden comments of last week, in which he said he would be, the way he put it, 100% willing to testify under oath about his interactions with James Comey. And so this was re-released. It was a piece from before we were forced to live with Donald Trump as alleged president, when we still had the opportunity to do something about it. We just didn't. August 10th, 2016, which from the past two shows we learned was the height of the shift from pro-Trump propaganda from our Russian friends and the shift to, well, the election is going to be rigged and or stolen. If Trump doesn't win, you need to undermine the authority of Hillary Clinton. This article was being written. We had the opportunity, but we didn't take it. Trump, a true story. In other words, this is a review of the 2007 lawsuit against him and the deposition during which the opposing lawyers were able to corner Trump into admitting that he's a gigantic psychopathic liar, basically, and caught him in a huge string of falsehoods. This called back to our attention in recognition of his insistence that he would be willing to testify under oath again, this time in the Comey situation. The lawyer gave Donald Trump a note, written in Trump's own handwriting. He asked Trump to read it aloud. Trump may not have realized it yet, but he had walked into a trap. "Peter, you're a real loser," Trump began reading. The mogul had sent the note to a reporter objecting to a story that said Trump owned, quote, a small minority stake in a Manhattan real estate project. Trump insisted that the word small was incorrect. Trump continued reading. I wrote, "Is 50% small?" This note was intended to indicate that you had a 50% stake in the project, correct? Said the lawyer. That's correct, Trump said. For the first of many times that day, Trump was about to be caught saying something that wasn't true. Did we read this? It may be that we may even have read this during the campaign. And needn't go all the way through it necessarily, but just a good refresher of the kinds of things he'll lie about without hesitation. And then, I don't know why he even admits it in depositions. I mean, I guess you cause more trouble for yourself if you're just caught in obvious perjury. But anyway, it was a mid-December morning in 2007, the start of an interrogation unlike anything else in the public record of Trump's life. Trump had brought it on himself. He had sued a reporter, and this does sound familiar, right? The idea that he had brought it on himself is what I meant. Accusing him of being reckless and dishonest in a book that raised questions about Trump's net worth. The reporter's attorneys turned the tables and brought Trump in for a deposition. For 2 straight days, they asked Trump question after question that touched on the same theme, Trump's honesty. The lawyers confronted the mogul with his past statements and with his company's internal documents, which often showed those statements had been incorrect or invented. The lawyers were relentless. Trump, the bigger-than-life mogul, was vulnerable, cornered, out-prepared, and under oath. 30 times they caught him. Trump had misrepresented sales at his condo buildings, inflated the price of membership at one of his golf clubs, overstated the depth of his past debts and the number of his employees. That deposition, 170 transcribed pages, offers extraordinary insights into Trump's relationship with the truth. Trump's falsehoods were unstrategic, needless, highly specific, easy to disprove. When caught, Trump sometimes blamed others for the error or explained that the untrue thing really was true in his mind because he saw the situation more positively than others did. Have you ever lied in public statements about your properties? The lawyer asked. I try and be truthful, Trump said. I'm no different from a politician running for office. You always want to put the best foot forward. In his presidential campaign, Trump has sought to make his truth-telling a selling point. He nicknamed his main Republican opponent Lion Ted Cruz, of course. He called his Democratic opponent Hillary Clinton a pathological liar in one Twitter message, all caps, of course, for that one. I will present the facts plainly and honestly, he said in the opening of his speech at the Republican National Convention. We cannot afford to be so politically correct anymore. So you should definitely take a look at it. You'll recognize this compilation of the kinds of lies, the one where he said he was paid $1 million for a speech, but on asking how much of it was in cash, he said it was $400,000. But the advertising for the speech raised his total compensation to $1 million. One in which he was asked about his net worth, and this was where it was first revealed that he that he estimated his net worth based on his feelings on any given day. You remember that one? Just chock full of these sorts of stupid examples of just how crazy he is with his lying and how stupid his explanations for his lies really are. I felt like it was more than $1 million, but it was actually less than $500,000. Yeah, but I felt differently. So, he's carried this over into the presidency, though. Anyway, you should read it and be astonished anew, as I was when I saw it. I will recommend that you take a look at this list just to see the sorts of things and the scope of things that he'll lie about and the ways he'll do it, and so weaselly, and it's really amazing. But a great reminder, therefore, from David Farenthold that we knew this all along, but I guess we can expect this thing. And also, by the way, a good reminder that his lying, as he says, is unstrategic and scattered and will often get him caught. The idea, his lawyers must be jumping out windows at this point. I will 100% willing to testify under oath. I doubt very much whether they will ever let him do that, and he'll come up with an excuse as to why. But it I'm sure has the rest of the country salivating at the prospect. All right, time enough, I hope, for one last entry, sort of a change in directions here, but something we want to return to that we brought up the other day. More on Qatar. Some speculation from Clayton Swisher, whose piece is running in the HuffPost here. I don't think he's a staffer there, but he's a freelance writer. But just some interesting background. We all know that there's probably something financial at the heart of what Trump is doing in taking on Qatar here on behalf of other Arabian Peninsula countries, Persian Gulf area countries. This is got some new information here I wanted to add to the record. I thought you would appreciate it too. Donald Trump, his daughter Ivanka Trump, and her husband Jared Kushner all repeatedly sought financing for various investments in recent years from leading figures in Qatar, according to sources with direct knowledge of the meetings. This goes under the What Have You Done For Me Lately column that we were thinking of just the other day. Those previously unreported overtures have taken on a new relevance as a diplomatic crisis aggravated by President Trump has left the small Gulf nation blockaded and isolated by its rivals, with tensions in the Middle East reaching historic highs. President Trump last week, of course, characterized Qatar as historically a funder of terrorism at a high level, an accusation that came just an hour after his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, appealed for no further escalation in the GCC squabble, urging dialogue to quickly resolve the crisis, which pits, of course, Qatar against Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE, and Bahrain. Tillerson noted the Qatari emir made progress in halting financial support and expelling terrorist elements from his country, comments echoed by the U.S. ambassador, Dana Smith, who tweeted, Qatar is a strong partner in combating terrorist financing. That partnership is not merely rhetorical. Of course, we all know about the huge air base there from which we launch daily airstrikes against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and more, of course. But here's the interesting part here. This is where we'll skip down here just to get to this. The Trump Organization, now under the stewardship of son Donald Jr., is reportedly in talks with Emirati tycoons to receive several $1 billion of investment, in addition to owning 2 golf courses in Dubai. And of course, the New York Times has reported that Trump has previously had as many as 8 business entities registered in Jeddah alone. In 2015, Trump spoke about his admiration for the Saudis and attributed it to his business dealings with them, saying, what he puts it, Saudi Arabia, and I get along great with all of them. They buy apartments from me. They spend $40 million, $50 million. Am I supposed to dislike them? I like them very much. So, a real worldly view of things, obviously. Anyway, this is the interesting bit here. Therein lies the source of much consternation among Qataris. Several people interviewed for this piece expressed concern that Trump's bias against their country might stem from the series of failed business overtures that he, along with his son-in-law Jared Kushner, made 7 years ago, which are only now being reported. They did not go as swimmingly as the deals made with the Saudis and Emiratis. And of course, this is the reason why you need to know the person's financial interests and get a hold of their tax returns, etc., so you can spot this stuff. In 2010, as markets were still reeling from the 2008 global economic crisis, Qatar was flush with cash, and countless business executives and foreign governments came calling. some to get liquidity, others searching for silver linings amid the global chaos. Trump in the latter category, then as CEO of the Trump Organization, but also, of course, star of the hit domestic American reality TV show The Apprentice. Traveling with his daughter Ivanka, Trump visited Doha in 2010 for separate meetings with Qatar Investment Authority Executive Board member Dr. Hussein Al Abdullah, as well as Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani, commonly abbreviated as HBJ, who was then serving as foreign minister and prime minister. Neither responded to requests for comment for this article, but at the time, the pair constituted the brain trust of Qatari financial and investment sectors. QIA is the world's second largest sovereign wealth fund, presently estimated at having $338 billion in assets under management. Then, as now, Sheikh HBJ had renown for being kingmaker of not just political deals, but financial ones, too. Using his business and political savvy, he has sealed deals ranging from Britain's Harrods to Germany's Deutsche Bank to America's Miramax Hollywood Studios. A source close to the 2010 talks with Trump say he made the Doha stopover, along with stops in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, to raise money for a distressed real estate fund he was assembling. Trump opened the discussion with QIA by bragging about the success of Trump International and the many deals he had personally put together. Trump had hardly got through his own biography when Dr. Al Abdullah, QIA's senior executive, interrupted to say words to the effect of, "We know who you are and what you've done. Tell us what you can do for us right now." That single curt interruption apparently left Trump stunned. He had expected his hosts to be impressed, if not grateful, that a person of Trump's stature would visit the Qatari capital. Apparently distracted by the lack of decorum, Trump barely continued with his pitch. The meeting abruptly ended, according to one account, with Trump exiting the room visibly angered. You could certainly visualize it. According to another, the meeting ended pleasantly, and the decision not to invest in Trump was simply about Trump's lack of a track record in doing real estate funds. I don't think he had done any of those. And besides which, why would you want him to deal with distressed real estate? He's a distressor of real estate. I don't know. Okay, well, so they didn't want in. The same source also said any coldness to Trump was more of a function of Dr. Abdullah's becoming numb to the same repetitive proposals. QIA routinely received such pitches. In the Qataris' view, if not Trump's, all that distinguished his proposal from so many others was his own celebrity status. A subsequent meeting that day between Trump and Sheikh HBJ ended with pleasantries, but with the top Qatari businessman keeping a hold of his wallet. Trump was unable to move any Qatari funds to the Trump Organization, and within months after leaving, observers noted that even Trump himself quit the distressed real estate fund idea, having failed to get a single backer anywhere. The Trump family interactions with Qatar expanded as Ivanka Trump returned to Doha within several months with her husband, Jared Kushner. Jared had a new pitch to make, this time on a different real estate deal. Ironically, some of Jared's introductions within Qatar were facilitated by a national of the country that is a key player in the present crisis, Saudi Arabia, through a personal friend, or a personal friendship with Saudi Prince Bandar's son, Khalid, who knew Jared and who remained in the U.S. after his father's tenure as ambassador ended in 2005. Jared gained entry to a younger cadre of successful Qatari businessmen during his trip. Jared and Ivanka overnighted at the Doha Four Seasons, thank you very much, and observers with direct knowledge of the visit say the atmosphere between them and their host was perceptibly better, if not warm. Jared had his own mission in mind to present to his Qatari hosts. He was desperate to secure funds to recapitalize his, does anybody know? Anyone want to take a guess? 666 Fifth Avenue property, which then, as now, was severely underwater. But in high-level meetings in Doha, neither QIA nor Sheikh HBJ showed any interest in Jared's building. This was the same issue with the follow-up meetings between Ivanka and Qatari investors held in New York in 2011. The New York Times at that point reporting on it and noting, generally speaking, all the things we had learned earlier about the property, that they had bought it in January of 2007. This is new. Closing the deal on Jared Kushner's birthday. That's cute. And paying the highest price ever for a New York office building. Of course, they said it was a great acquisition for our company. According to the Kushners, they put $500 million into the purchase. The luxury high-rise has been plagued by massive debt ever since. Insiders say the Kushner family overpaid, which offers one explanation for why they have turned to foreign sources to help bail it out. Discussions to buy a stake in 666 Fifth Avenue between Jared and Sheikh HBJ, who left government in 2013 to pursue his own vast business interests, are said, by a source with knowledge of the talks, to have continued right up until the election of 2016. Still can't squeeze money out of these guys, huh? The hunt for capital continued after Jared ended his pursuit of Qatari investors last year. In March of 2017, Bloomberg reported that the Kushner Companies was close to securing unusually favorable terms in talks with the Anbang Insurance Company, despite its ties to the highest echelons of China's Communist Party. And of course, well, some chocolate cake probably helped with that. On the same day, Trump attacked Qatar as a financier of terrorism. Lawyers from his Justice Department offered an advisory opinion. We talked about it the other day, arguing that the president could accept payments from foreign governments after all, which would presumably include countries like Qatar and China. Today, with Trump allying himself and the United States with those blockading their tiny country, Qataris can't help but wonder, is this all about Trump's hurt feelings over business deals that didn't pan out? I guess so. Now, there's a bit more to the article and some interesting accusations being made, to be sure, but they pertain more to other aspects of the Middle East drama, and an older one at that. In particular, Jared's family history, they point out here, of investing in illegal West Bank settlements that is probably going to render him a tough sell as shuttle diplomat for settling the Arab-Israeli or Palestinian-Israeli, I guess, is the more specific terminology. The Palestinian-Israeli conflicts. Settling Middle East peace when you're a heavy investor in illegal settlements in the West Bank is going to be a tough sell. But I don't think anybody really thought Trump was giving any serious consideration to the Palestinian perspective in all this. I guess there's just not enough Palestinian investors out there buying apartments in his buildings. That's really about all I can think of to differentiate. It's not that he loves Arabs in general because they're all such wonderful people. He just loves the rich ones, no different than with any other nationality, including Americans, by the way. He has no greater love for poor Americans than he does for rich Chinese. I can pretty much assure you of that. Okay, well, time to wrap things up. An interesting look at that, and just one more piece in the Qatar puzzle. We've got some interesting reporting we can use in the days to come to round things out, including some written from inside the region that offers some additional insight that we may not have gleaned yet from here. It's still a tough thing to crack through the Persian Gulf politics from here in the United States without a serious background, and it will just lean on others to help clear things up for us. Anyway, thanks again for listening. Glad I could put this show together for you for this Wednesday. Sorry we missed our opportunity to talk with Joan, but maybe we can get her on later in the week. And of course, Greg Dworkin will be back with us tomorrow for Thursday's show. The refrigerator continues to work. That's good news. Things are looking up. The summer's beginning. We're all having a good time. I don't have a preview for you, unfortunately, of what's coming up next on the after show because it's a pre-taped show, but I can guarantee you this. It's fantastic. It's up to date, and it's got today's news in it. You can be sure. Stay tuned.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waltman.
Thanks so much for listening. I can use this opportunity to remind you that if you've been enjoying the show and perhaps you're new to it, perhaps you're not, why not join in with our monthly sponsors at patreon.com, patreon.com/KagroX. That's the space where you can sign up to be a monthly supporter of the show and keep us on the air.